Well, good morning. First of all, thanks for having me here this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. What I want to do first is kind of go over, with a PowerPoint presentation, a brief overview of our agency and the things we do, and then within that, I'm going to talk about how we involve farmers and landowners, as well as Chairman Holbert mentioned about the depredation permit. I'll talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the chronic waste and disease too, but other parts of our agency as well. So I'm just going to jump right into that. I did want to mention that I'm a native Tennessean. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, believe it or not, in western part of Nashville, but spent some time in the country, spent some time in West Tennessee and Cumberland Plateau, and now I'm back here in Middle Tennessee again, where my roots are. In fact, my roots go way back to 1800s. My family descended from the Brownings in Middleton and Murray County here. There's one called the Gordons, the Gordon House on the Natchez Trace Parkway. I'm related to them way, way, way back. So Wilson Pike in Williamson County is named after my family. So we got a long history with being in Tennessean. So with that, I want to start, but just basically that's our mission. That's our, for TWRA, is to conserve, manage, protect, preserve the fish and wildlife of the state, as well as for the use of and benefit of the citizens of Tennessee, and also the waterways, because we are in charge of the boating program, as Director Carter was mentioned about. As one of his first roles was the chief, not the first roles, but he was the very first chief of the boating division when it was formed in 1990. So basic four functions is wildlife management, law enforcement, outdoor recreation, and information and education. And in the structure, we've got more divisions in this, but this is the ones I'm going to highlight today and talk a little bit about some of the others a little bit. But basically, wildlife and forestry, law enforcement, fisheries, biodiversity. Biodiversity is basically all the animals that can't be hunted. They may be like threatened endangered species, or maybe just animals like snakes and toads and salamanders that would never allow to be hunting, but we have the responsibility to manage those. This goes all the way down to critters as small as snails, mussels, and crayfish. And then outreach and communications. So a wildlife and forestry division. Programs of the wildlife management areas. We do a lot of surveying and monitoring of the population, and we also conduct research. We don't have a research arm in our agency, but we contract with universities, especially the University of Tennessee, that does a lot of our research, and the Tennessee Tech University as well. Of course, we're involved with hunting regulations, habitat management, leased hunting land program. I'll speak to that real quick. I know now is just a couple weeks left before dove season. So some of you may have been approached, or you may not have been approached, but we do lease private land to allow the public to dove hunt on. And if you have a field that may have been in corn or some other crop that you've already harvested or something and may have some doves on it, if it's a decent field, maybe attracting some doves, we'd be glad to lease it, pay you some money for it, let the hunters hunt on it for just a little bit. Another thing we do is lease larger tracts of land, like timber company land. We lease it for the public to hunt on as well. These are typically 1,000 acres or bigger. And the private lands on the bottom, Director Carter mentioned about over 90% of the lands in Tennessee are in private ownership. So we have a private lands biologist in each of the four regions. I already mentioned the regions are regions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Region 1 being the far west, 2 is here in Middle Tennessee, 3 is the Cumberland Plateau area, and 4 is the far east. And we have a partnership with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, where they will fund about half the salaries for these biologists, and they will work with local landowners and farmers about management of their property for conservation, for even forest management, but also for wildlife management. We probably need about 5 people per region, because their attention is in high demand, and they stay busy all the time, but they work with all the private landowners and farmers in the area. I mentioned the wildlife management areas. We have 110 scattered across the state, 30 Region 1, 33 Region 2, 29 Region 3, and 13 in Region 4. There's fewer in Region 4, but they're a lot bigger. So acreage-wise, we probably have more acreage of wildlife management area in Region 4 than we do the rest of the state. And we manage more than 1.5 million acres. And they're all the wildlife managers are open to the public, great hunting and fishing. We don't own all the land. The state of Tennessee owns about 500,000 of those acres, but we manage in conjunction with other entities about 1.5 million. So in the fisheries world, which by the way is my background, I was chief of fisheries for 5 years, and before that I was a biologist and assistant chief of fisheries. Started off in Jackson, Tennessee, or Region 1, as my full-time job as a manager of a lake called Lake Graham. Many of you from West Tennessee may have heard about it, but I got to start there before the lake was even built. And it was a great experience for me to be able to go out and see how the process goes with the lake being built, and from that to stocking the fish and seeing the fish grow and open it to the public for fishing. But we also own a total of, and manage and operate 10 hatcheries. 5 are what we call warm water or cool water hatcheries. That's basically fish like walleye and crappie, Florida largemouth bass, striped bass. And in the cold water side of the trout facilities, we have 5 of those, and those are rainbow trout, brown trout, lake trout, and brook trout. We stock about 7 million fish on the warm water side and about 2 million trout a year. Now, a million of those trout are provided by the federal hatchery at below Dale Hollow Dam. They provide about 1 million trout. So we stock about 2 million trout in Tennessee waters a year. We manage over 500,000 acres of reservoirs and lakes, 60,000 acres of rivers. We do fish research, just like on the wildlife side. We survey and monitor, make sure the population, check them out. If there's any regulations need to be in place, we implement those. And we also do habitat enhancement. And invasive species management, I'm going to talk just a second about that. Our biggest concern in fisheries now is our invasive species, but particularly the Asian carp. You probably heard about Asian carp. The silver carp is the one that jumps in the boat when they're startled. And so they're more of they're dual problems. They're a problem because they can impact the population of the fish by outcompeting them for room and for food and space, but also because they jump out of the water and they can injure a boater if it's going at a high rate of speed. So we have a plan to try to manage these species. I don't think we'll ever eliminate them, at least not in the near future, but at least we can manage and keep the numbers down to a reasonable number, and we're doing it by providing some incentives to commercially harvest them. Turns out silver carp and the bighead carp, even though they got a lot of bones in them, the meat is delicious. It's not like the common carp, but the meat is real mild. It's white meat. It's of course, it depends on what kind of batter you put on them, but they're very tasty fish. And so that's the value in there is human consumption. So the other thing is if we can manage these fish, but if we don't do something about keeping them from coming in from the Ohio River, then it's not going to do any good. So we're testing a barrier. It's called a bioacoustic fish fence. So it's bubbles, it's strobe lights, it's sound. It's all one thing. It's at the lock at Barkley Dam right now, and it's under. We're testing it out. The USGS, United States Geological Survey, is the one conducting it. And if it proves to be effective, we should know that pretty soon. Then we're going to push to have some of these barriers implemented at nearly every lock, but for sure Kentucky lock, because that's where the fish are coming in. Even though these dams are located in Kentucky, we're working together as a group in the Southeast, especially Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky. Are all working together to try to keep the Asian carp out of our waters. And we have the 500,000 acres of reservoirs. I mentioned there's 32 reservoirs, large reservoirs, 3 major river systems. We have the public fishing areas, the Tennessee Family Fishing Lakes. I mentioned Lake Graham, where I started. There's about 18 of those in the state, all located in Middle and West Tennessee, though, in areas that used to be deficient of large reservoirs. A lot of them, when they were built, there was no large reservoir at the time. Now we've had some new ones, Timms Ford Lake, for example, Percy Priest Lake. They're relatively new. They're not brand new, but they're relatively new. And the Tennessee Trout Program stocked a lot of trout, as I mentioned earlier. We only have one natural lake in Tennessee, by the way, and that's Reelfoot Lake, and that's only about 200 years old. It's created by an earthquake. The rest of them are man-made reservoirs, these 32 large reservoirs we have. So on the law enforcement side, our wildlife officers protect wildlife and other boaters by enforcing all the laws, conduct accident investigation, and to protect wildlife and other hunters by enforcing all wildlife laws such as bag limits and make sure everybody has a license. We have about 240 wildlife officers in the state, I would like to say this, if, for those of you who have not met your wildlife officer in your county, or there may be a couple of them in your county, I encourage you to reach out and get to know them, meet them, develop that relationship. And we're going to do the same thing on our end. We're going to encourage our wildlife officers to go and maybe try to attend a meeting, or maybe you can invite them to one of your annual meetings. A good way to get to know them. We have our own academy now, Law Enforcement Academy. It used to be our newly hired game wardens would go to the Tennessee Law Enforcement Training Academy in Donaldson, and just with the policemen and sheriffs and other deputies that were trained. And so we almost had to debrief them when they came out, because they wanted to come out and be a cop, be a policeman. And that's good for policemen, but for our wildlife officers, they deal with people on a daily basis, and they can't be heavy-handed. They can't go in there and try to write a ticket for every single thing. One of the things that we're going to try to do at our academy, since we control it, is we're going to invite people to come in and talk to them outside of just the wildlife and fisheries folks. We're going to invite the Farm Bureau to come out and speak to them, talk about how important relationships are, things they can do to work together. So I'm not sure if they haven't been out there yet, but at some point in the next couple of months, the cadets or the new recruits started about 3 weeks ago, and they go all the way through December. So they've got a lot of time to be trained. In outreach and communications, basically either I&E, information education, LEMATICS kind of thing. We have news releases, magazine, we have a magazine that we put out about every 2 or 3 months. Fishing and hunting guides, of course, the multimedia production, video stuff. Tennessee Outdoor Journal, Tennessee Wildcast, which is a podcast. I think the current one's got former director Ed Carter on it, so we need to watch that one. And of course, a website, a license app, all social media, and we work cooperatively with all the divisions within the state, at least within the divisions within Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And the outreach, some of you may have never heard of this, but it's called R3. R3 program stands for Recruitment, Retention, and Reactivation. And it's actually a nationwide effort to try to get more hunters, more people into the world of hunting and fishing, and also to retain those that maybe after they hopefully don't get bored doing it after 1 year or two and they quit, and then reactivate those that may have had to quit for a reason. Maybe they were just got married, or they were in college and they just lost interest for a little while, lost their hunting buddy or something. Try to figure out ways to get them reactivated, because there's a lot of people like that out there. And why is it important? Because, well, it's tradition, and tradition of hunting and fishing in our state is tremendous. It's been around for a long time. And also family time in the outdoors. We found out through studies that one of the most important things that people look forward to be able to, especially for fishing, is spending time with the family. And in wildlife management funding, we depend on the hunters and fishermen for the majority of our funding, and we'll get to that in just a second. But if we don't have the hunters and fishermen to help pay for the programs that we support our agency, then our agency is going to not do well. We'll have to let people go, and we'll have to reduce programs that are so important to the hunters and fishermen. And of course, maintain the importance of traditions for future generations. So these are just a couple of examples of some of our R3 programming: Becoming an Outdoors Woman, Natural Archery in the School, or NASP, Tennessee Outdoor Youth Summit. We had to postpone it this year. In fact, we had to postpone some of these events because of the virus, but we hope to get them going again next year. The Toys is a great program to introduce young high school kids to all the things related to outdoors, conservation management, things like that. Not necessarily to teach them to be hunters and fishermen, although it's a part of it, but just kind of teach them about wildlife management, about fish management, about canoeing, and all kinds of things related to the outdoors to get them interested in that. And the Tennessee Hunting and Fish Academy, we're working in conjunction with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. That's basically a mentoring program where adults or hunters will mentor another adult, or maybe a child, or maybe both, and try to teach them how to hunt, not just one time, but get them to go out with them on several occasions to make them help them learn how to be hunters and fishermen, be comfortable with it. Young youth and young adult hunts, wounded warrior hunts, free fishing days, usually the early Saturday in June, and fishing courses in high schools and grade schools. So I mentioned funding. Most of our funding comes from the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and permits. About 50% of our funding comes from that. We also get some money from what we call the PR, the Pittman-Robertson Federal Aid, and the Dingell-Johnson, which is an excise tax on fishing equipment. The PR is on hunting equipment, archery equipment, firearms, ammunition. Fisheries is on sport fishing equipment and marine fuel tax, things like that. So those are a pretty significant amount of money that helps fund our agency. We do get a little bit of money from the general appropriated fund, but it's not a whole lot. I think it's about $450,000 a year, but we're very appreciative of every penny we get, and we spend it wisely. We've done a great job of spending our funds so that the hunters and fishermen feel like we're not abusing it, and we scrutinize every budget that we have, and we try not to overspend and spend wisely. So the biodiversity and wildlife conservation I mentioned earlier, it says we are one of the most. I think we are the most diverse states in the nation as far as animals go. We have, I know, an aquatic community, we are probably second to maybe Alabama, but overall with all the birds and the mammals and everything, we are the most diverse state. And that's because of our geography. You know, we have the mountains of the Smoky Mountain area, far east, all the way down to the Delta area, the Mississippi River, and then everything in between. So we're unique as a state because of that, so we have a vested interest in all of our critters. And these animals belong to the citizens of Tennessee. So we all have a responsibility for managing these species as well. The goal for the Wildlife Diversity and the Biodiversity Division is to keep most of these animals off the federal endangered species or threatened list. And so we're working to do that as well. So I mentioned that every agency's got these business systems, basically license sales, revenue collection, IT, human resources, engineering, real estate, and legal. I just want to throw that up there. So if somebody from our other divisions, if I don't mention them, they won't get mad at me. So, and I want to bring up a couple other topics. One of them is, I mentioned the chronic wasting disease. For those of you who are not from West Tennessee, you may not be familiar with it, but we found in 2018 a couple of deer that were tested positive for chronic wasting disease, or CWD, in Hardeman and Fayette counties in a very southern part of that area. What made us start looking hard in that area was a couple of positive cases in Mississippi, just south of there, the state line. And so we started looking hard and started finding them, and then we put a really focused effort on it for the last 2 years and found quite a few more. So we don't know how long we've had them. CWD is not a virus. It's not a bacteria. It's a protein, a misfolded protein called a prion. Very similar to scrapie and sheep and mad cow disease as far as the type of disease that it is. It's always fatal to deer. It's transferred mostly from deer to deer, but they can also pick it up. The prions are very hardy in the environment. They can withstand all kinds of conditions. In fact, you have to get the temperature up to about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit to even kill one of these things or to deactivate them. So they're not really alive, but they're a protein, And so it's relatively new to us. There's 26 states in the country that have chronic wasting disease in their state. And they've never been known to impact or impact a human being. So we're thankful for that. But just to be safe, the Center for Disease Control recommends not consuming deer that are known to be positive or test positive to have the prions in them. So we recommend that, to have the deer meat tested, and mostly in those areas in southern western Tennessee. So there's a few counties that surround that. And our goal is to try to keep the disease from spreading. Unfortunately, to do that, we have to thin the deer herd down in those areas to keep them from spreading. So we're focusing on that right now, and our partners and our stakeholders are hugely important, are the hunters and the landowners and the farmers, because without them, without their assistance, without their help, we're not going to be able to control it. So that's reaching out to the farmers here. One of the things that can be done is to allow hunters, if you do allow hunting on your land or hunters on your land, to encourage them to kill as many deer as they can up to their bag limit, and even allow more hunters if possible do that as well. So we do have a plan to try to manage it. We have a chronic wasting disease plan and in place, and that's to try to target those areas of what we call the sparks, the deer that are kind of out of the normal range, maybe have gone further away from it. If we can eliminate those deer or have a good chance to eliminate some of those deer, we'll try to reduce the spread of chronic wasting disease in other parts of the state. Big game depredation permits, Chairman Holbert mentioned that a minute ago, and ability to make these permits easier to obtain from farmers because of problems they may have. But something we did a little bit different this year as a result of a request by y'all, by the farmers, is to allow a permit before any damage is done. Because as you know, once seed is in the ground and start sprouting and deer get in there and start eating up all the sprouts, the damage is already done, it's too late. You have to go in and you have to document, this is the way it's been in the past, document damage, and then go in and get a permit to shoot the deer. Now, if they've had a history of this in the past, the wildlife officer will come in there and issue a permit before any plants are even up out of the ground. So that was something, as I mentioned too, is something as a request of the farmers, and so we listened and we heard, and we're doing that. In fact, this year is our first year to do that. So I just want to say one other thing too, and that the relationship that we have has been mentioned already is between the farmers and the TWRA is great, better than I've seen it. I haven't always been involved with the Farm Bureau because I was on the fish side, but at the same time, it's always been in the back of my mind. I've heard about it, especially as deputy director. I was involved with it some. Developing a relationship with the folks at the Farm Bureau. Chairman Howard and I met with them, and along with the deputy director of TWRA named Jason Maxidon. We met with them a couple weeks ago at headquarters in Columbia, and I think we want to keep that relationship going. We want to keep developing that, but appreciate all the cooperation that we have right now between our agency and farmers and landowners. And I thank you again for inviting me to come up here.